agree.
Getting back to the Indian music you mentioned, it's interesting in terms of the last 11 years in your life that your play is on, it takes place in India and is a classic play, is that right? Can you tell me a little about it?
Yeah, it's a story of Emperor Shah Jahan, who was a Mughal emperor, and his attachment to his wife, Mumtaz Mahal, and the tragic death of his wife, in whose memory he later on built what's now called Taj Mahal. And therefore it's a historical tragedy, and it's an epic play, it's a very traditional play, and it has elements of drama in it. Of course, I mean, it's not pure history. I mean, I use historical facts as a rough outline.
Basis.
Yeah, the basis.
Now, when you spoke earlier of feeling sometimes, or a proportion of Asians feeling intellectually superior to many white people, and morally superior, which is something I thoroughly understand. I'm genuinely interested to know generally, or specifically, what percentage of Asians feel intellectually superior to, say, Africans? I'm not talking now about in Britain, but in Asia and Africa.
Yeah, well, see, this would be very hard for me to give any hard statistics. I can give this particular example that, in fact, I did a survey for New Society Weekly, which was published 3 weeks ago, in which I asked colored people, that's Afro-Caribbeans and Asians, half and half number-wise, on what they thought of the British people. And one of the questions was if they thought, I mean, my questions were not loaded. My questions were as scientific as you could say. That is, English people are compared to you morally, I'm going to say intellectually equal, intellectually inferior, intellectually superior. And when I had this sample, 3 out of 15 Asians that I talked to said that they were intellectually superior to the British people. And they said that their children are proving this now in schools because they don't have the language barrier, whereas the first generation Asian had this language barrier. Now, as regards the other part, as to what they feel compared to Africans, I didn't ask this question, and I think this question has probably to be asked in African context, because one goes on ask these people about Britain because they are in Britain, about the British people because they are in British people, and to get a sensible survey of this, it has to be in a large context. No use going to India and asking people what they feel of Africans, because the context is not large enough to give a fund of experience on which to draw a conclusion.
No, sociologically I can see that, but I would think that you must have grown up in an atmosphere in your own country where there was, in the sphere in which you grew up, a sense of awareness of the literary, musical, artistic, intellectual history of your own country, and to some extent of Africa. Now, did you form any impression at that time in yourself as a child growing up?
No, not at all. You see, the thing is that the Asian on the whole doesn't know anything about Africa, simply because there's historically no contact. Now, for myself, I learned more about Africa and got more interested in it because I was in this country. I came in 57. There were everyday newspapers about Ghana and about and what was then Nyasaland and Rhodesian Federation and so on. So people acquire so much interest and experience because of historical reasons, because this was the country had all these colonies. So naturally, British people, the people living in Britain, acquire much greater awareness of Africa and so on, as against the people who have had no such contact. I mean, if Indians had gone and colonized Australia or African parts, then they would happen. But there wasn't. And secondly, even my own awareness of my own culture, etc., comes in most instances secondhand, because the textbooks that I read, because I grew up in British India when it was a colony, were written by under the influence of the British Raj. So even my knowledge of my history didn't come to me directly. It had to be filtered through the great British Raj.
Have you formed any impression yourself, and I'm not specifically asking you not to be a sociologist, but have you formed any impression yourself in this country of whether, on the whole, amongst your acquaintances or those to whom you've been exposed, the Asian, generally speaking, is of a higher intellectual caliber than the African?
No, I cannot say this for two reasons. See, that one, sometimes there is a difference of scale, and the language is a very important one. Now, if one wants to find the average intellectual standing, IQ, of an Asian and say and of a man of African descent, which is mostly in this country West Indian,
Yeah.
you're going to get different scales. Two reasons. One, the language, you see, because you have to talk to the Asian to get his native quotient of intelligence. You must remove this barrier of English language. You must talk to him in his language. And then to translate this, because with West Indian you have no other, only the language, you see. So there is the kind of, you're using two different scales. Secondly, their backgrounds are different. Now, Asian background is predominantly rural background. And even if you were to use the IQ tests which are used in this country, you translate them directly into the Punjabi or Urdu, this would not be the proper test, because all these tests in this country in America are the urban tests, and they are middle class oriented. So one couldn't, so really do a good job of it, one has to find a scale, a test which fits with their environment and their background and their language and so on, and the same thing with West Indian. So for me, I cannot generalize whether one is superior to the other or not, because I myself have to switch. When I talk to an Asian, when I talk to West Indian, I talk to an English.
Now, this surely is going to make the book you're planning a very difficult hazard, isn't it?
Well, I'm very clear on my book. In fact, I've been commissioned to write this book, and I have the whole outline. And my book basically runs on two different, it has two contents. That you studying an immigrant, a colored community, you have the two sides, political and cultural. Now, culturally, West Indian has been orphaned. Due to all the West Africans destroyed his culture, his religion, everything. Now, therefore, West Indian has, in fact, a greater problem of identity. Asian doesn't have a cultural problem. And I feel that as time goes by, and by time I don't mean next generation, I mean 3, 4, 5 years, things are changing very fast, that West Indians in this country and Negro in America is going to be very conscious of being an African. And he has to. The only way anybody, and I mean anybody, irrespective of Negro or Asian, will be respected if he knows what he is. And the fact that the millions of Negroes in America and in the West Indies have been culturally orphaned, this is a terrible thing which has been done to them. And this is exactly where I want to put my stress on, that if people are pressing on the Asians, discard what you are, be like us, they don't know what they are doing. They're destroying something which will create more problems for them in the coming generations than they will solve. Because as long as a man is proud of what he is, he knows what he is, his culture, he will meet people secure inside here. A Negro and white man will never meet. African or European will meet, because African knows what he is. In the long run, American, European will respect an African. And this has happened time and time again. In America, if an American Negro puts on the robes of a Nigerian and is served in a restaurant, and he goes there as a nigger, he's not served. This only goes to show that people in the long term will respect you for what you are, but if you try to copy them, be like them, then you end up being in the trash can, as the West Indian is today and the Negro in America.
How much time have we? About a minute. I'd like to ask you one final question. Have you found, in your experience over 11 years here and in the United States, when you must have, in your own mind, been torn between a righteous expression of anger and a desire to communicate, which could only be done when you had your temper under control, have you found on the whole that you are tending more towards persuasion and controlled argument, or that the angry statement is apt to get the best results?
Well, I think this can only be proved. I did write a centerpiece article for New Statesman.
This has to be a short answer. We've only got about 25 seconds.
Yeah, but I think, I have given to my experience very ironic and humorous touches, and which have been published. And I'll be glad to send you a copy of it.
Fine. Right. That's a very good point. We didn't get on to humor at all. Thank you. Hope the lights weren't too hot.